Welcome to the 28storms.com tropical weather update for August 10th on this Wednesday afternoon. Seemingly overnight, the National Hurricane Center is now following three tropical systems that have at least some potential to develop over the next 2 days. One is a weak area of troughiness of low pressure here to the east of the Florida Peninsula that only has a 10% chance of development. This is the remnants of Emily still moving out to sea. They give this a 10% chance of formation within 2 days, although that's not going to really happen. And also, if we look toward the Cape Verde Islands, we're still closely monitoring 92L Invest, which has been reactivated now, and they're giving this a 20% chance of development over the next 48 hours. So here's a look at this afternoon's satellite imagery, and first off I would just like to point out a rather interesting thing that you normally don't always see on the visible. You can notice some of the anticyclonic motion here in the low-level banding or low-level cloud features here over the southwest Atlantic, and that denotes the area of surface high pressure that is well entrenched over the southwest Atlantic today. But more importantly, here is a tropical disturbance located along Florida. This was more so elongated in the eastern Gulf of Mexico yesterday. I kind of wrote this off as having no chance of development, but the Hurricane Center is still keeping an eye on it, and I don't blame them because overnight the GFS was beginning to develop an area of low pressure here along the northern half of the Bahamas, and then it took it fairly close to Bermuda. So this is not going to be any threat to the United States, although it's obviously giving Florida some shower and thunderstorm activity right now, but interest in Bermuda might want to keep an eye on it, although I'm really not that concerned about the prospects for development. None of the models are really that gung-ho on organizing this into a tropical cyclone. And also, if we look at the latest water vapor imagery, we see that there is a lot of troughiness still exiting the U.S. East Coast, and I think that the upper level air environment will be just a little bit too volatile for anything to really organize out there in the western Atlantic at this time. But here's our second and more important player today. This is 92L Invest. Again, this was deactivated for about a 24 to 48 hour span, but it's showing a little bit more sign of life today. And here we are once again on the latest visible imagery, and it still has a very well-defined low-level circulation. Once again, the main problem with this system all along has been the lack of convection, and now we're actually beginning to see a little bit more convection here. And as soon as it can start to beat out some of that dry air and begin to funnel some moisture around that low-level center, this should be able to at least try to develop here, as the upper-level winds really aren't all that obstructive. Before we go into any additional analysis, I would also like to very quickly show you the eastern Atlantic satellite sector. And first off, this is 92L Invest, the same feature that we've already discussed. And look at this second tropical wave now coming off the coast of Africa at a much lower latitude. And some of the models are also trying to develop this feature down the road as well. And it's also, or always, a bit more interesting when these tropical waves come off at a lower latitude. That implies that they will have a harder time to be recurved by troughs to the north. So both of these features will be closely monitored over the next week. So if we go ahead and put more of our focus back to 92L, let's first talk about why this probably won't show much sign of development within the first 48 to 72 hours. The first graphic is showing you the latest Saharan air layer outbreak, and we have a lot of African dust, and this is the main thing that this chart shows. We have a lot of African dust out ahead of the wave axis in the central and western Atlantic, and this is being funneled in from northeast to southwest. And also, if we look at the latest water vapor imagery, which is also an indicator that we have a lot of dry African air coming off the coastline still. You see these darker colors right here? This is going to be a lot of dry air that the tropical wave has to overcome. Now, what could possibly happen to make this wave overcome that dry air? Well, let's look at the latest sea surface temperature anomalies, or at least the sea surface temperatures with the 26 degrees Celsius threshold overlaid here. And this is the development threshold right along here. And if you would like to know where our tropical wave or system of interest is located, it's right around 13 degrees north and 30 degrees west. So obviously it's just barely within the favorable area of water temperatures for tropical development. But look what's out ahead. Nothing but continuously more favorable and warmer waters here for this system to work with. And obviously as it gets into those warmer water temperatures, it's going to be able to develop more convection, more thunderstorm activity, and less dry air will be able to work its way around and into that low-level center when that is the case. And I've said it before, but the upper-level wind shear pattern does look fairly good. We have some westerly shear to the north, some easterly shear to the south, but right in between and directly over the wave axis, we have a favorable pocket of upper-level ridging. And you really can't complain too much when you see a pattern like that. It's not perfect, but it's definitely supportive of tropical cyclogenesis, and also there's really not that much in the way of significant wind shear over much of the central Atlantic here, and many of the dynamical models are showing this favorable upper level ridge continuing westward along with the wave axis. And of course this afternoon we still have a very positive sign of 850 millibar vorticity, so this is definitely a well-defined tropical wave that will be closely monitored over the next week. And just for good measure, the latest floaters are now oriented or focused on 92L invest, and we certainly have that well-defined low-level circulation. It's still not well organized just yet. Again, much of that convection is now located to the northwest of the center, which could be indicative of some slight southeast wind shear, but definitely not a big deal. And here's the low-level center beginning to pivot around a much broader low-level circulation, and it may just take a few days for this to really get its act together. And of course that dry air is still a big problem as of right now, but that might become less and less of a factor as this system moves its way into warmer sea surface temperatures. The tropical wave is still fairly weak based on tropical cyclone standards, so it's going to be guided by the low-level steering flow, which is currently being shown. And there is a very slight weakness in the central Atlantic right now, so that will more than likely induce or continue to induce a west-northwest motion instead of a straight westerly track. And as you can see, several of the models are picking up on that idea. This is the extrapolated current movement, so this is what the path would be like if the storm continued to move in that general direction. However, look at all of the forecast models here, taking it off more toward the west-northwest. Now, sometimes they've been a little bit overdone with these northerly motions, especially from tropical cyclones in the central and eastern Atlantic. They have a tendency to be a little bit too far north, although the overall pattern does seem to suggest that this will clear the Caribbean. That's not to say that interests in the Northeast Caribbean need to let their guard down. Anytime there's a tropical system out there, I advise you to keep a close watch on it. But as of right now, all of the given data to us would suggest that this will eventually make it into the western Atlantic. And also one other thing about these systems being just a little bit too far north, if you recall with Tropical Storm Emily, those models had to seemingly shift southward every 6 hours because they just showed too much of a northerly turn too fast. So the overall model solutions appear to be correct, although I do think that it may come just a little bit closer to the Caribbean than that spaghetti model plot indicated. So here we are now taking a closer look at the dynamical model guidance, and we'll start off with the 12Z CMC sea level pressure forecast. There's 92L invest. There's not much development initially, but here we are by day 6. It has a clear-cut tropical storm here between Puerto Rico and Bermuda. And this is a fairly legit tropical storm, and it's not that far away from Bermuda at this point, so definitely something to monitor closely. This is the 850 millibar representation, and it shows things just a little bit better here. And also notice toward the end, even in the low levels, we still have a fairly persistent trough off the U.S. East Coast, which would suggest that this will recurve away from the United States, but again, that is a 6-day forecast. Also, take a look at the Central Atlantic. Unlike some of the other models, it's really not that bullish on the second tropical wave right behind it, but it does show a third potential wave now to the south of the Cape Verde Islands by 144 hours. Now, there are some key differences between the CMC and 12Z GFS, but one thing remains constant, and that is 92L invest with its potential for some development down the road. The GFS is not quite as aggressive with it, but it does try to make it a tropical depression or a tropical storm when it just misses the Northeast Caribbean. And then by day 6, it's a little bit weaker, and therefore it makes it a little bit more toward the west without being picked up by any troughs. But more importantly here, by day 7, notice what's down toward the southeast. This is now a minimal hurricane being projected by the GFS. And remember that second tropical wave that was now just leaving the coast on the satellite imagery? Well, that is the system that the GFS is picking up on here in the medium range. This is the 850 millibar GFS representation, and there it is developing both of these systems. The first one, which is 92L, just misses the Caribbean, and here's this other one coming in at a little bit lower of latitude here. Now, the only good thing is that so far it's taking this a bit more toward the north at the very end of this run, but this is getting into day 6 and 7, so there's a lot of room for error there. And much like the Canadian, here's that third tropical wave now exiting the coast by day 7. And also, if I loop this even just one more time, remember that disturbance that the Hurricane Center is monitoring here near the Bahamas? Well, it even tries to develop that as it passes just to the north of Bermuda. So there's several things on the map today, and it's even trying to develop some stuff out here in the eastern Pacific. So we're not forgetting about you down there in Mexico. We'll still continue to keep a close watch on the eastern Pacific for any significant tropical cyclone activity. Now, that's not the end of today's model madness. We're now looking at the 12Z ECMWF vorticity analysis, and I know it might be really hard to make out on this map, but this is the Lesser Antilles island chain. Now we're getting into the Greater Antilles with Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba. Here's Florida. This is North Carolina. And just for more perspective, this is Texas, Louisiana, and the rest of the Gulf Coast. So once we get way over here, this is the coast of Africa. This is 92L Invest. And notice over the next several days, the European is now becoming a little bit more aggressive here. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The model is not really that enthusiastic about significant development, but this is definitely a player worth monitoring. If I even just had to go by the European, this would at least tell me that there is some chance for weak tropical depression or tropical storm development. And also notice now, much like the GFS, is beginning to develop our second tropical wave. And keep in mind, this is coming in from a little bit of a lower latitude, which could spell a little bit more trouble here. But again, this is really far out now. And then by day 6 and day 7, both of our potential tropical cyclones are gaining latitude at a fairly good clip. It looks like 92L Invest still gets picked up by the East Coast trough, so the pattern hasn't fully changed just yet. And by day 8, we see that the second tropical system is just barely missing the Caribbean, but it's coming in a little bit closer here. And by 9 and day 10, we see that the second system is also beginning to recurve. But again, this is really getting into voodoo territory, as James Spann, a very good meteorologist up in northern Alabama, often likes to say. So despite the possibility for multiple tropical cyclone formations over the next 7 to 10 days, we still look fairly good out there this afternoon. Any development is still a long ways away, and all of these systems are expected to develop well into the deep tropical Atlantic away from any land masses. The current models are taking this just to the north of the Caribbean right now, but that is subject to change, and we are getting deeper into the season. So now is just the time to keep up with the tropics on a daily basis. And although none of these storms are currently being projected in the models to make much of a threat to the United States, there is growing concern about the pattern here for August and September. And this is not nothing new here at 28storms.com. We've alluded to this even as far back as May and the first day of June when our 2011 hurricane season forecast was issued. Again, if you would like to go back and read that, just go to 28storms.com/2011. But this is the current overall pattern here. This is the GFS in shambles, and it's still picking up on that long wave trough that's been fairly persistent over the northeast. And of course, that's being reinforced very often by the mid-level ridging that's been across much of the central United States all summer. But notice as we go into time, at least based on the GFS ensembles, that by day 6 to 10, we see that the trough weakens some, and we begin to see a little bit more ridging here near the western Atlantic and the Canadian Maritimes. And then by days 11 through 15, this is the ensemble average. We see that the trough over the east has retrograded a little bit more toward the west here over the Great Lakes. And also notice that we've got a lot more ridging overall here over eastern Canada. And that is a bit more of a problematic setup than what we've been seeing over the last 2 months, especially if we're talking about our interests here along the U.S. East Coast. But as of right now, especially with our first system, 92L Invest, this pattern may not change quick enough for it to become much of a threat. It still may recurve just to the east here over the western Atlantic, but of course that is something we'll just have to keep a close watch on. And then if this pattern were to truly change as the ensembles are suggesting, we may have to look at other systems a little bit more carefully down the road once they do form. So that is your update for this Wednesday afternoon. Please check again by tomorrow afternoon for another extensive tropical weather update from 28storms.com.